In this video, I want to look at how accurate the polls were in both the Senate and presidential elections, but we'll start with the Senate elections because that's going to be a lot less controversial than a presidential election, so we'll get to that first. Now, due to the easy math, most pollsters did forecast the Republican Party to pick up the Senate, which is what wound up happening. Most pollsters had Republicans at 51 seats. Democrats generally hovered around the 48 mark with a few toss-ups. But we'll see how accurate they wind up being. Now, obviously, most states they got correct. California, they got correct, and they knew it was going to be safe as well. Connecticut, they also knew it was going to be safe. Delaware, they also knew it was going to be safe. Looking at Hawaii, everyone knows how democratic that state is, and that it was going to be safe for Hirono. Indiana, everyone knew was going to be safe for Republicans, and it was. Massachusetts, everyone knew was going to be safe for Democrats, and it was. Minnesota, everyone knew was going to be safe for Democrats, and it also was. Amy Klobuchar is really popular, despite the state being competitive in a lot of other races. It was not competitive here, I'll just put that out. Mississippi, everyone knew was going to be safe for Republicans, and it was. Nebraska, the special election, everyone knew was going to be safe for Republicans, and it was. Everyone knew that New York was going to be safe for Christian Gillibrand, and it was. Everyone knew North Dakota was going to be safe for Kramer, and it was. Everyone knew Rhode Island was going to be safe for Democrats, and it was, as predicted. Everyone knew Tennessee was going to be safe for Republicans, and it was. Everyone knew Utah was going to be safe for Republicans, and it was. Everyone knew Vermont was going to be safe for the Independents, which caucus of Democrats, which it was. And same for Maine, except for 538, but that was safe for Angus King. And finally, West Virginia, everyone knew was going to solidly flip towards the Republicans, and it was at 41 points. It was the second largest margin of a state, despite actually being a Republican pickup. Shockingly enough, in 2018, Manchin won this seat. And looking at the polls here, many of the polls actually had Manchin winning re-election in 2018. I don't know if you saw that. Despite it being one of the strongest Republican states in the country, he left office, though, and the state was just guaranteed to be a Republican pickup. And Wyoming, of course, 51 points. But looking through this list, let's look at how accurate some of the other ones were. Arizona, they had generally being a Democratic state, between the lean and likely margins. Gallego wound up winning Arizona by 2.4 points, so thus they were pretty accurate on that. Florida, they had as in the likely and lean Republican column, and Rick Scott won by 12.8, probably a bigger margin than what you could expect, but still believable. Maryland was some said solid, some said likely, some said lean due to Larry Hogan, a popular ex-governor, running. It was 11.8%, so I'd say that was pretty accurate. Michigan, most had it being close, but winning for Democrats. The margin of 0.34% for Slotkin surprised some, but you got the result correct, so that's really all that matters. Missouri, Real Clear Politics and DDHQ actually forecasted the race to be competitive somewhat, and it was somewhat competitive, as it was under 15 points, but Hawley still won by a convincing 13.7. Nebraska, many actually had the regular election being close with the independent running, and they said that this was probably going to be a close race for Republicans in Nebraska. Fisher won by 6.7%, which was actually a bit larger than what I think was being predicted. Montana especially, though, was larger. Many were saying this was going to be a close race with a Republican pickup, and the Republicans flipped the seat by 7.1 points. Again, it was a flip, as Tester did win election in Montana in 2018. Nevada, many were saying was going to be close but winnable for Democrats, and Democrats wound up winning by 1.6 points, so I'd say that they were pretty accurate there. New Jersey, a few may have had New Jersey being competitive, and 9.6 points, that's probably closer than what anyone was really predicting out of New Jersey, which actually made the state, fall into the somewhat competitive column. New Mexico, some were saying it was going to be competitive. Many were disagreeing. It was 10.1% in the end of the day. Pennsylvania is really the one where everyone actually messed up, because everyone was saying it was gonna be a toss-up, a lean Democratic. Republicans win the seat by 0.22. FYI, Ohio, many were saying it was going to be a toss-up. A few were saying it was going to lean towards Democrats. I thought Brown was going to win re-election, but Moreno wound up flipping the seat by 3.6 points, which was close. In 2018, we did see Brown win this seat, and while Ohio has shown strong evidence of flipping, heavily towards Republicans, this seat was somewhat competitive in 2022. So I thought that there was a good chance Brown could survive re-election, but I was wrong. Texas, many were saying this was going to be a really close race, even a toss-up according to Real Clear Politics. Cruz won by 8.5 points, a much larger margin than I think was expected. Virginia, many were saying it was going to be safe into likely. Kane won by 8.9%, which is probably smaller than what was expected. Wisconsin, they said was going to be close but go to Democrats, and that's what ended up happening with Baldwin winning it by 0.85%. So the only egregious error was Pennsylvania. I will say states like New Jersey and Virginia were probably closer than expected, and states like Texas were probably more Republican-friendly than expected. Same for states like Montana and Ohio. But Pennsylvania was really the biggest blooper because nobody had thought that McCormick was going to win the seat. Now for the presidential election. First of all, they only mention states here that they think have a chance of not being safe by everyone. So someone has to think it's going to be competitive first. So we'll go through this list, and then after that, what we'll actually do is we're going to look at states that were probably more competitive than they were forecast to be, or less. Colorado, everyone was really saying was going to really be safe Democrats. Some were saying it was going to be more competitive. And depending on what your margin was, you may have been right, you may have been wrong. Colorado wound up being won by the Democrats by 11 points. New Mexico, people were saying was in the likely Democratic column, which it wound up being at 6%. But that might have been a bit closer than what was expected out of New Mexico. Virginia, again, likely Democrat, and it wound up being likely Democrat, but 5.8 points. Might have been a bit closer than what was predicted. Maine at large, we saw mostly in the likely Democratic column. I'd say that they got this one pretty accurately, as Harris and the Democrats won Maine by 6.9 points. New Hampshire, they were saying it was going to lean into likely Democrats. Some were even saying safe. But it wound up being competitive. Harris only won the state by 2.8 points. Kamala Harris is the only... New Hampshire is the only Republican state to have... Republican state in New England since 1988, when Bush won the state in 2000. Every other state in New England and every other state in the Northeast except for Pennsylvania, the last time that they voted for a Republican was 1988. But New Hampshire's always shown signs of being competitive, and it was in 2024. Minnesota, again, everything is in the lean to likely column. And at 4.2 points, you could really make a case for either one of them. Because, the state was close to being likely Democrat. By the 2nd district, Minnesota is going to be lean into likely Democrat. And, again, 4.7 points for Harris. I'd say they got that one pretty accurately. Michigan was a common mistake, as most pollsters had Michigan being a toss-up, but a Democrat-leaning toss-up. And Trump wound up winning the state of Michigan by 1.4 points. Nevada, Democrat-leaning-ish toss-up, Trump wins by 3.1. Pennsylvania, slightly Democrat-leaning toss-up, Trump wins by 1.7. Wisconsin, slightly Democratic-leaning toss-up, Trump wins by 0.86, which actually wound up being the closest of Trump's victories, making Wisconsin more Democratic than the nation at large, despite its Republican shifts. Arizona, they had as being slightly Republican, but mostly being a toss-up. Trump actually wound up winning by a larger than expected 5.5% margin in Arizona. Georgia, he had splits in the polls. Many were saying it was going to be a toss-up. Trump wins by 2.2. North Carolina, again, mostly a toss-up, and some were saying it was even going to flip to Democrats. But North Carolina carries through for Trump by 3.2. Florida, they had being likely to lean Republican, but the 13.1% margin of victory for Trump may have surprised many. Texas, very few people thought it being solid. Many were having it in the likely to lean column. Again, a 13.7% margin of victory in Texas may have surprised many. Maine 2nd District, most were saying likely Republican, and I would say that they were pretty accurate. Ohio, many were saying likely into safe, and it wound up being 11.2 points for Republicans. So depending on your definition, you could have gotten that right. Iowa, though, many were saying Iowa was going to be close. Some were saying Iowa was going to be safe. It was pretty safe. Trump won by 13.2. Alaska, many were saying solid into likely, and they were actually pretty accurate with Alaska's 13.1% backing for Trump. Nebraska's 1st district, almost everyone was saying it was going to be safe for Republicans, and it actually wasn't at 13% for Trump. It was the only electoral vote that shifted left relative to 2020. Seeing in 2020, Trump won by 14.9. Kansas was safe, and almost everyone had it being safe, but one pesky pollster that also just completely got the election wrong, as he said that Harris was going to win 308 to 230, and Harris was going to win North Carolina. Like, bruh. Sabato also had the Democrats winning outright 276 to 262. They were more accurate as they did get Georgia and North Carolina right, but they still made major mistakes. Other pollsters may not have had the Democrats winning outright, but they showed, the Democrats having more electoral votes than they wound up winning, because in 538 Economist and YouGov, they had Michigan voting Democrat. And even if they didn't, Republicans would have pretty much swept the toss-ups, which they actually wound up doing in order to win. So I'd say that in a bigger picture, most polls would have indicated that Kamala was going to win the election, even though Trump wound up winning. And looking at some pre-election polls of Kamala winning, looking at the model by The Economist, it did show Kamala having a very narrow lead. And whatnot. This election really could have gone either way, but it broke for Trump more than expected. Also, New Jersey was forecast to be safe by everyone, and Harris only won by 5.9%. It was alarmingly close. Other states, like New York, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Illinois, and Delaware, they said was going to be safe, and they wound up being under 15 points. Most of them are excusable, but like Illinois was actually only 11 points. So, not as much. Oregon also, but again, that was 14.3. Just pretty interesting how they just always tend to underestimate Republican support.